interaction, so we could prolong it. So I'm not going to speak the name of my ancestors, the father of my country, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the goddess of my country, and my grandparents who taught me the ways of my ancestors. Again, as usual, every year we do this for the library. They ask me to present my research to the public, and this year is especially more prescient, or it's a little prescient because I undertook writing on Haitian epistemology, what I call Haitian Vilokan Idealism, and Routledge, the press who is putting out this 5-volume work, actually proposed that I do a tutorial to bring my work down to the public. So I started, if you all go on YouTube, I started these tutorials slowly breaking down my work. If you all read my work, it tends to be very academic, very philosophical. So I started to do the tutorials while simultaneously working on journal articles and working on the books. Now, in order for you all to understand what I'm working on, all of my work, every book that I've published is interconnected. People don't realize this. And I'm going to give you a brief example to demonstrate how all of my work is interconnected and how I got to the point to address my work from an epistemological perspective. When I was in grad school, there was a problem in the social sciences that's called the structure agency problem. That means what is the origins of our actions in the world? How do people behave? How do we go about doing what we do? And I'm going to use an example to make it clear to everybody. There's a debate between two scholars. One is an anthropologist. His name is Marshall Solins. The other one is a literary theorist. His name is Obiasekara. And they're arguing in the 17th and 16th century, there was an Englishman by the name of Captain Cook. He landed in Hawaii and the Polynesian Islands. And when he arrived, according to Marshall Solins, the native Hawaiians assumed him to be their god. Because, as Marshall Solins argued, that's how native people thought. They internalized their social structure, so they responded to the world, everything through their myth. In fact, his book is titled, How Do Native People Think? Well, a native Hawaiian by the name of Obiasekara, he says that's racist. Because they were native people, Marshall Solins being a white European American, he believed that native people thought through their myth. So he argued, no, the native people were just as rational as white people, and they did not take Captain Cook to be their god. So that debate starts what's called the structure agency problem. Do we behave by internalizing the myth of our society and everything we do is through our myth, or are we calculating rational human beings? Well, I'm in grad school at the time, and I wrote a paper because most of my philosophy professors were phenomenologists, so I wrote a paper to resolve that issue. And what I argue is that, no, we're not all rational. We do view things through our myths, just like white Americans view things through the Protestant Christian myth. It's the same thing. The natives view their things through their gods as well. So then I had to prove my research, so I began by undertaking it, I began my analysis through the black-white achievement gap, analyzing the black-white achievement gap. Then I went into, from the black-white achievement gap, trying to understand black American consciousness. And from there, I went into understanding Haitian consciousness. And what I argue is that the problem that we're having is that we have to remember that, yes, we do view things through the myths of our society because we're socializing the society. So that what I argue is that the black-white achievement gap is what was called a dialectical problem, because most black Americans are attempting to convict the society of racism so they can participate in the society. And from there, I try to juxtapose that with what happened at the originating moment of the Haitian Revolution. Because what we have to remember, and this is the problem I have with a lot of Haitian scholars, and this is how I got into understanding Haitian epistemology, so I can use my understanding of Haitian epistemology to resolve the issue of the black-white achievement gap, the nature of black consciousness, etc. What we have to remember is that in Africa, we went about behaving through our myth. We had myth in Africa. We call it Vilokan, the basis. Prior to Christianity, Vilokan was the myth by which we went about living our lives. So when we were enslaved and came to the Americas, we reproduced our lives through the myths. The problem is the white man marginalized our myths. They say they were barbaric, they were savage, they were primitive, etc. So what would happen then is they forced us to adopt their myths, which is why many of us would become Christians. They marginalized our myth and forced us to adopt their myth. So this is why I argue whenever we are studying the Haitian Revolution, we cannot, because what has happened in Haitian studies is that we have grouped the experiences of the blacks under either the umbrella of the myths of the mulatto elites or under the black bourgeois elites, the black generals. They would write their history at the expense of the Africans, because they're even Toussaint, Dessalines, they realize there's internal struggle within the whole Haitian Revolution between Neg-Bossal, the Africans, the mulatto elites, and the black Creoles. They marginalized them. Since I said, even Sanssouci, when Leclerc returns, he doesn't want to fight under Christophe. He says, no, Christophe is a sellout. He doesn't trust Nexayo. So this is why Christophe will assassinate Sanssouci, because they're trying to take, even Dessalines, he's trying to undermine the leadership of the Africans. I always put in my mind, whenever I'm analyzing anything in Haitian studies, that over 62% of the Africans were directly from Africa when the revolution commences. So they had their myths. And what I'm trying to explain to whites when they're trying to, for example, one of the white academicians, Susan Buck Morris, who wrote a book on Haiti, Hegel, Haiti, I was a TA for her. And she always, even in speaking to her, she always undermined as though the Africans didn't have their own worldview by which they understood what they were doing. So it's important for me, whenever I try to analyze the Haitian Revolution, I make sure I make that separation. That's why the first volume that I'm writing for Routledge is called The 4 Revolutions of the Haitian Revolution, because I argue there are 4 revolutions taking place. There is the White Revolution, there is the Mulatto Revolution, there is the Creole Black Revolution, and there is the African Revolution. The one white theorist who does do some justice to that concept is Laurent Dubois. He doesn't do a great job, but he tries to highlight that position. Because what we have to realize is the Africans wanted nothing to do with the colonial system. Absolutely nothing. But the generals, the black generals, they looked to reproduce the colonial system. Toussaint simply adopted Sonthonax Corvée system. That's all he did. All subsequent leaders following Toussaint would adopt the same Corvée system, which is the colonial system. All it is, okay, you're no longer slaves, but you still have to work on a plantation. You just give a quarter of what you have to the state, half to the plantation owner, and you keep a quarter. We never look at how did the Africans recursively organize their lives? How did they interpret many of these things? Either, and I know Dr. Liu is big on this, Dr. Liu, uses a humanist perspective to understand the Haitian Revolution. And it's that humanist perspective. In fact, I have a paper coming out called Haitian Epistemology, Haitian Vilokan Idealism, and its anti-humanist position. Because the Africans had an anti-humanist position. They didn't care for the colonial system at all. Now, Lou is right. The mulattoes and the Creole blacks, yes, they had a humanist position. They wanted all of us to be treated equally within the concept of each one of us as autonomous subjects with rationality. The Africans didn't think like that. Rationality is just one element of our existence. So for me to understand that, we have to begin with demystifying. I know that's demystifying the worldview of the Africans prior to slavery. Once we demystify that, we can understand their epistemology. How did they know what they know? And from there we can develop, because what has never happened in Haiti, and that's happened everywhere else, I know some people want to say there's no such thing as regional epistemology, but that's not true. The Germans had an epistemology. German idealism began because the Europeans, they institutionalized their views. When someone wrote an article, for example, Immanuel Kant begins German idealism. All subsequent theorists in Germany will critique Kant. Schopenhauer will write his doctoral dissertation on Kant. From Schopenhauer, you will get Nietzsche. From Nietzsche, you will get Hegel, Marx. From Marx, you will get Husserl and Heidegger. But all of their thinking will go back to Kant. The problem we've had in Haiti, because of slavery and all this, we haven't been able to develop this. This not only applies to German idealism, but it also applies to the British. The British is the same thing. You go from Descartes to Locke. From Locke, you go to Berkeley. From Berkeley, you go to Hume. You get Bertrand Russell, etc. They build on their epistemology. In the black world, the reason why Afrocentrism has taken over is because many of the regions aren't able to do that. We were never, because of slavery, we were never able to institutionalize our epistemology. Now, the voodoo sector did. Max Beauvoir is one of the first Vaudouisans to start to demystify Vaudou. He says, no, Vaudou is a science. Stop thinking of Vaudou as a religion. Loyal, they're not spirits, they're concepts by which we are to live our lives. And once you do that, and this is where for me, I'm taking off where Max Beauvoir left off. Prior to his death and speaking to him, this is where I'm taking off. Demystifying Vaudou to develop the epistemology that's in Vaudou, which I call a transcendental idealist and a realist philosophy. And from there, to start to understand what are the elements in Vaudou that would give rise to Bois-Caïman. That's what I'm trying. So for me, unlike Susan Buck-Morris, who wants to argue that there is what she calls a voodoo historical epistemology, she wants to argue that Vaudou and its encounter with modernity, that's what led to the Haitian Revolution. What I'm arguing, no, we must begin with Vaudou. Parce que what many white people want us to believe, the Africans were okay with slavery because their myths did not allow them to challenge slavery. I argue no. If you understand Vaudou and you demystify it, there's something in Vaudou that will not allow you to be enslaved. Because your relationship has to be a one-on-one relationship with nature, not with any other social system. That's why it's anti. Everybody always say, it appears that way. It appears that way. Because within Vaudou, there is a concept that you must have total freedom. And your relationship is between you and nature. So whereas in Europe, Hegel, for example, to develop consciousness in European epistemology, you need the other, to develop consciousness. Because who I am is contingent upon how I see myself through the eyes of another person. And Vaudou is not like that. You don't need the other. There's no social formation. Who I am is innate. I'm born who I'm going to be. So I don't have to go to school to be who I'm going to be. Without ever going to school. Even in Western, Chomsky says the same argument. So for me, once we do that, once we build and demystify voodoo, we can build an epistemology, and from there we can develop a methodology. From that methodology, we can develop a theory of learning and development, because that's how the West developed. They demystified Christianity. And from there, I argue, we can take those elements to critique and understand certain social problems we're having, such as the black-white achievement gap, such as black consciousness, such as Haitian consciousness. You can do all of that simply within the logic of voodoo, because the Europeans, that's what they did. Everything occurred. Marx develops his materialism within Western German idealism by critiquing Hegel. He didn't go outside. Schopenhauer developed his notion of the world as will and representation within a critique of Immanuel Kant. John Locke develops his theory of tolerance within the logic of his empiricism. So for me, my argument is we have to develop methodologies within the logic of voodoo. We can do that to facilitate knowledge development of Haiti. Not only Haiti, but for the rest of the black world. I'm not a big fan of Afrocentrism because for me that's a reaction. It's a reactionary philosophy. You don't need a reactionary philosophy, I argue. You can demystify, because we institutionalize voodoo as an epistemology. You can demystify it and develop scientific ideas and methodologies to work with. We don't have to always go to Europeans. So that's the project that I began in grad school and continuing now, which is why I'm so tired, because I understand this is something that's going to take a lot. It's 5 volumes that I'm working on. So this is the process that I'm starting, demystifying it, constituting. I started with the theory. So I'm going to end with this. So I started inductively as opposed to deductively. Deductively, I could have developed the epistemology and then find evidence for it. No, I said I'm going to find evidence for it first and then conceive of the epistemology. So this is what I'm working on now, and hopefully we can start to, because that's what we have to do. We have to institutionalize these things in the school system. In Haiti right now, whatever the NGOs dump on us, that's what we accept. Whatever the governments dump on us, that's what we accept. Or the World Bank, the IMF, etc. Whatever they dump on us, that's what we accept. So once we do that, I argue we can develop methodology, a system of theory and learning within that we can apply to our children. And I promise I'm going to end with this. The most important thing, Western science does not believe that we can have innate knowledge, that you can be born knowing how to do something. The West doesn't believe that. Memjean, the West doesn't believe that spirits can talk to us, even though now they're starting to prove that consciousness exists after death. But there's a critique of my work that just came out recently where two scientists in Arizona, University of Arizona, are starting to study a theory that I developed within phenomenological structuralism. What I argue is that consciousness, connaissance, is a 5th force of nature. There are 4 forces of nature: gravity, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. I argue that consciousness is a 5th force, and it's tied into the microtubules of our brain. So when we die, consciousness is simply is subatomic particles that get recycled throughout the universe. So now they're trying to prove whether or not that's true. I got all of that from Haitian Vodou, because in Vodou it says we're recycled 16 times. We come back 8 times as a man, 8 times as a female. So I argue in order to say whether or not that's true, we have to be able to prove it. So why can't we try to prove concepts that we already have and will do to prove it? Now, if that's true, we are born 8 times as a man, 8 times as a woman. That means every time you're reborn, ou déjà gen connaissance from your past life, right? So why should I have to be taught anything again? We call children who are born knowing how to play the piano by ear, we call them savants. Could it be that in another life they recycled consciousness, they knew how to play the piano? Is that possible? There's a brilliant medical doctor by the name of Reginald Crosby. He wrote a book called Quantum Voodoo, where he's trying to show concepts that they're now proven in quantum mechanics. No, Voodoo, we were already saying them. For example, parallel universe. Now we believe in quantum mechanics and physics that there's a parallel universe. Every time you make a choice, you open up another parallel universe. So there's several poles out there in the universe. But Voodoo has been saying that for a long time. So why we have this knowledge, in order to, we have to demystify it, try to prove it, and institutionalize it. Because we do have children, if you're working in the school system, where you don't technically have to teach them how to do certain things. They already know it. My wife has a cousin that can play the drum by ear. So in psychology, we have to develop psychological models to help. Chomsky is one of these people who says, yes, we're pre-structured to do certain things. But everybody ridiculed Chomsky when he said this, because everybody believed in the behavioral model of the empirical school, empiricism. We're born tabula rasa, we don't have anything in our mind, we just go about, everything we know we learn from experience. Chomsky said that's not true. So in Voodoo, we said that's not true. So why can't we prove it so we can develop models? There are children in Haiti who are doing great work and they've never been to school in their lives. My grandfather was a genius, could not read or write, but he was brilliant. He could fix anything. You could take my grandfather anywhere and he'll take the next person the next day to the same place. So we have to develop models of learning and development out of our own, because Voodoo is a way of knowing, just like we have to remember, the West, science is only the demystification of Christianity. It begins with Descartes. Descartes demystifies science and continues all the way up to the present day. It's a demystification of the Christian religion. So why can't we do the same thing? Demystify Voodoo. Now, I'm not saying that once we demystify Voodoo, we won't see similar developments as the West. Of course we will. We're human beings. We experience the same resource framework. We will see the same. I argue Haitian Voodoo is a form of German idealism. There's a parallel development in Voodoo as well as in German idealism. That's my problem with the people with the Afrocentric school who want to develop they want to maintain Voodoo as a religion and not demystify, because that's their criticism of me. They want to maintain Voodoo as a religion. I'm trying to do to Voodoo what whites did. So what? Why can't we do that? That doesn't mean we have to dominate nature just because we do that. But that's the project that I'm working on, and hopefully all the volumes can come out this year, but I'm going to end with that. So I'll take any questions.
I have so many, but I'm going to just start with one. And I'm not sure I can.
In Christianity, you have Satan. Some people truly believe there is a man out there, a being out there called Satan, Satan, whatever. For me, I don't believe it, so I get rid of Satan altogether. Now, Voodoo, nous dit, there's 401 lois. God plus 400 lois. I say, okay, what are the lois? Ezili, motherhood. Ezili, freda, love, passion. Well, those are concepts. So I say, you know what? They're not spirits. your concept. I can be wrong. I could be wrong. But I'm demystifying. Another thing. Now, Vodou, we say there's Lugau. I've never seen a man turn into a werewolf. So for me, that superstition, I'm going to brush it aside and develop different concepts from that. So that's the project I'm doing. I'm demystifying. I'm saying, okay, I don't believe there's a man in space that created the world. For me, that's an energy. When you read the myth of Vilokan, the first myth is God created the world out of itself. And in this world, God created two worlds. God created the world of phenomena, the world that you and I exist in, and God created a parallel world. This parallel world is how we ought to live. That's where God, the concepts exist. So for me to live, for me to live, to be happy in the material world, I have to apply the concepts that I get from the world of Numina, the world of Vilokan. But it's a parallel world. Everything that happens in the material world reflects the parallel world. Because it's two worlds. Since I fed on Vodou in the parasteel reproduces the world of Vilokan. Potomikan is one world. La Terre is another world. C'est loyaux sortis en bas de l'eau. Yo monté, they come up. But pour moi, loyaux c'est concept. I don't care about the it makes you speak in tongue. I don't care. For me, it's a concept. You want to take somebody's husband, created by Esli Frida to make you sexy so you can take the man. So you trying to internalize a concept so you can go. The concept of love, so you can reproduce that concept. So I demystify it. I don't care about and that's what Max Beauvoir was talking about too. Wade Davis, who wrote The Serpent and the Rainbow, when he was a scholar at, well, he was a PhD student at Harvard at the time. He went to study the science of zombification. Nous-mêmes in Haiti, we believe in the superstition of zombification. And it's nothing but a science. They take the blowfish, they take the serum, and they turn it into a powder.
That's right.
It's a science. And they develop anesthesiology from that science. But we had it all along, but we stuck to the myth. Zombie, your way they zombie, your way cochon, blah blah, cow. I've never seen them turn a man into a pig or a cow. Is it possible? I don't know. I've never seen it. I don't care, so I'm not going to focus on it. I'm just going to demystify it. So we call that process demystification. It's the same thing the West did. Descartes, how do I know what I see in the world is real? Could there be a demon that is deceiving me? Where do you come up with this demon stuff? He gets it from Christianity. Because God created the devil. So he says, but if I believe in God and my heart is in the right place, God won't deceive me. So I can believe that the world is real. We call his philosophy empirical realism. Like he believes the world is actually real. I can touch this chair, which is different from empirical idealism, which says, everything I see in the world is just a part of my imagination. A person who believes that, his name is George Berkeley. He believed in empirical idealism. Everything that I see is fake. It's only in my imagination. But, so, for me, yes, Vodou can be a religion, but I demystify it. I say, the superstition, I'm going to get rid of all the superstitious stuff and focus on what I can prove empirically and rationally.
So the moment you can do that, it becomes science.
That's what science is. Yes, that's what science is. All science is the demystification and finding evidence for what we say, for what we believe. Since I've been with the epistemology, you need to have evidence for what you call truth claims. So you can't say I believe in this but have no evidence for it. That's religion. That's faith. For example, I say, and I'm going to end your question with this. Immanuel Kant argues that he doesn't have proof for the existence of God, but he believes in God by faith. Same thing with Thomas Aquinas, who comes up with the 5 proofs for the existence of God. He says, although for him you can prove the existence of God through empiricism, but this, what we call scholastic philosophers, their belief in God was something of faith and not necessarily proof.
Si on dit qu'on veut demystify Vaudou, right? Bon, nous connaissons une relation qui est entre Bougan et nature, right?
Yes, yes.
Ça veut dire que si on a un Bougan malade, les gens qui sont malades, Bougan ils font médicaments pour le bas, parce que c'est une relation que avec nature, avec toi.
Yes.
Après, ça veut dire que moi-même qui vais avoir une relation avec Bougan, quand je même plante dans Vaudou, ou pas guérir. Pas oui. Non. We got to have knowledge of the plant now. Mais toujours dire qu'on a the knowledge of the plant qui c'est scientific part of it là. But on besoin still mystical aspect ça pour qu'à utiliser dans médicament pas pas monde. How que on prend Vaudou pour demystify pour mettre en gros essence concernant Vaudou.
Max Beauvoir wrote a paper on that. Il écrit en papier sur ça. Il dit comme ça. It's the same example when you're given medicine by a doctor, but he gives you dosage by which you ought to take that medication. 2.3, you can OD. 2.1, it will have no effect. It's the same process. Level do is not a bouillie fait là. You go in jump with bouillie fait là. If you bouillie fait là to walk, it doesn't work. Even not that. Il va bon pour retirer tout ça et posséder ta et dolan il sorti là-dedans. You have to boil it just right. Women involved who don't understand that, now we're either going to boil it too much or not boil it at all. C'est donc pour les nous prendre médecine avant à l'école en Haïti. You go médecine, right? Et des fois, ils font malade because they didn't prepare it properly. It's the same thing in Western science. We've introduced this concept for fonti prière, that's what, but that's mystification. And then it's out. Mais c'est pas pour on gagne, c'est ça Max t'a dit, c'est pas pour on gagne, c'est moun qui croit c'est essential dans Vaudou, on va dire là, but Lord demystify it, it's not. C'est Max D, it's a brilliant paper too, where he's talking about the herbal medicine in Vaudou. Because you have to know the right plants to ascertain. You have to know exactly how to prepare it. All of that goes into connaissance. And this is why I say Haitian idealism is a form of German idealism. Because the West assumes all of us are rational. But there's a German philosopher by the name of Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, who wrote a book called Being in Time. And he says, no, rationality is one element of our existence. He calls it present at hand. He calls it the analytic of design. What that means is how, as human beings, we know things. He says there's 3 ways we know things. We know things ready to hand, unready to hand, and present at hand. Ready to hand is when we're born, we just go about doing everything we want to without consequences. Unless something goes wrong. He uses the example of a hammer. When we're born, we're taught how to hammer. But if you're a carpenter, you know how to hammer without thinking about it, unless the hammer breaks. Once the hammer breaks, you have to think about it. Well, how do I fix this hammer? So you assume a present-at-hand stance. That's what we call rationality. We're not all rational. They're just living in the world, just existence. So c'est ça. On bon moun yo pran prière yo. One gun gain connaissance. He understands, he's been dealing with this. In order for gain connaissance, you have to study the plants. C'est comme ça, as PhDs, nous venons gain connaissance. We have to study. We have to demystify, understand things rationally. The average person truly believes, many people believe that there is a God. I don't know. I say there's energy. We're all energy. Now, can I prove it? I don't know. But I don't believe there's a white man in a beard in outer space that judges. That's just my position. I know some people do, but that's my position. So for me, that's the demystification process. Tout bagay yo for nous commencer demystify them.